My younger sister blamed her ADHD meltdowns on me for years. I lived with a ticking time bomb called Zoe, but she was different from those siblings who are jealous. She didn't copy me. She dragged me all the way down. If I walked past her room, her screaming fit was my fault. If I ate my morning Cheerios, her tantrum was because of my chewing. If I got an A on a chemistry test, her sobbing breakdown was due to the academic pressure I supposedly created. My name is Maya, and for 16 years I believed I was the problem in my own house. It started small, almost believable. Back in 7th grade at Willow Creek Middle, I'd be doing algebra homework at our kitchen table when Zoe would storm in, tears streaming down her face. She'd march straight to Mom and Dad, wailing about how my pencil scratching was triggering her ADHD and making it impossible for her to concentrate on anything. "Maya, honey, could you just move to your room?" Mom would ask, that familiar exhausted look in her eyes. You know how sensitive Zoe gets. I didn't mind then. Moving seemed easier than dealing with another 2-hour meltdown that would end with Dad rubbing his temples and muttering about family harmony. I'd gather my textbooks and retreat to my bedroom, thinking I was being the bigger person. I had no idea I was feeding a monster. By freshman year at Westbrook High, Zoe's performances had evolved into Oscar-worthy productions. I'd spent 3 weeks planning my 15th birthday party. Just a simple movie night with 5 friends. We were going to watch The Princess Bride and eat way too much popcorn and birthday cake. Nothing fancy, nothing loud, just girls being girls. An hour before my friends were supposed to arrive, Zoe launched into her most dramatic performance yet. She threw herself on the living room floor, literally writhing and screaming about too many strangers invading her safe space. Her face was red. Snot was running down her chin and she was hyperventilating so hard that Mom actually grabbed the phone to call 911. "Please, Zoe," gasped between sobs. "I can't handle all these people. The noise, the energy, it's going to give me a panic attack." Maya knows this triggers me, but she planned it anyway because she hates me. Dad looked at me like I'd personally stabbed my sister in the back. "Maya, call your friends. Tell them the party's cancelled." "But Dad, they're already on their way. Ashley's mom is driving from Silverton." And now Maya, I made those phone calls with Zoe smirking behind our parents' backs. 5 confused, disappointed friends. 5 awkward conversations about why I was cancelling last minute again. By Monday morning, I was officially that girl. The one who couldn't commit to plans, whose family was complicated, who probably shouldn't be invited to things because she'd just cancel anyway. But the real breaking point came 3 months later when Dad sat me down for what he called a serious conversation about your behavior. "Maya, we need to talk about your sister's condition." He said, his voice heavy with that tone parents use when they're about to destroy your world. "Zoe's therapist, Dr. Rios, says her ADHD makes her extremely sensitive to environmental triggers. And unfortunately, honey, you seem to be one of her biggest triggers." The words hit me like a physical blow. "We're considering sending you to live with your Aunt Linda in Denver if you can't be more careful around your sister." Dad continued, his words echoing in my head like a death sentence. Aunt Linda, the woman who collected ceramic cats and made tuna casserole every Tuesday. The aunt who lived in a cramped apartment where the closest thing to a social life was bingo night at the senior center. My entire future was being held hostage by my sister's supposed condition. "I don't understand," I whispered, my hands shaking in my lap. "What am I doing wrong?" Mom leaned forward, her expression a mixture of sympathy and frustration. "Honey, it's not that you're doing anything intentionally wrong. But Zoe needs stability, and Dr. Rios thinks having fewer variables in her environment might help with her emotional regulation." Variables. That's what I'd become in my own home, a variable to be eliminated. From that day forward, I lived like a ghost in my own house. I tiptoed past Zoe's room, ate my meals in silence, and kept my achievements to myself. When I made the honor roll, I hid the certificate. When I got selected for the academic decathlon team, I never mentioned it. I learned to exist in the negative spaces of our family, fitting myself around Zoe's needs like water finding its way through cracks. But even my silence wasn't enough. One October morning, I was eating my breakfast, plain oatmeal, no brown sugar, because the smell overwhelmed Zoe's senses when she appeared in the doorway like a storm cloud. Her hair was tangled, her pajamas wrinkled, and her eyes had that wild, calculating look I'd learned to fear. "You're being too loud," she announced, even though I'd been eating in complete silence. I looked up, confused. "I haven't said anything." "Your spoon, it's clanking against the bowl. The sound is stabbing into my brain like needles." She pressed her palms against her ears dramatically. "I can't think. I can't breathe. I can't." And then she was on the floor convulsing like she was having a seizure. Mom came running from upstairs. Dad dropped his coffee mug and suddenly I was the villain again for the crime of eating breakfast. "Maya, go eat in your room," Mom said, already kneeling beside Zoe. "And next time use a plastic spoon." As I gathered my bowl and trudged upstairs, I caught a glimpse of Zoe's face. For just a split second, when she thought no one was looking, her anguish disappeared, replaced by something cold and satisfied. She saw me watching and immediately resumed her performance. But it was too late. I'd seen the truth. That night, I started keeping a journal, documenting every incident, every trigger, every meltdown. I told myself I was looking for patterns, trying to be a better sister. But deep down, I think I was already collecting evidence for a case I didn't know I'd need to make. The worst part wasn't the walking on eggshells. It wasn't even the isolation or the cancelled plans. The worst part was watching my parents transform from the loving, supportive people who used to cheer at my soccer games into exhausted strangers who saw me as a problem to be managed. November came and went, then December. And with each passing month, I felt myself disappearing a little more, erased by my sister's performance one meltdown at a time. But I had no idea how much worse things were about to get. 3 months later, I was guarding my Columbia University acceptance letter like my life depended on it. I'd worked 4 years for a 4.0 GPA, spent countless nights perfecting my personal essay, and invested every ounce of my soul into getting into my dream school. When that thick envelope arrived on a snowy February morning, I knew my life was about to change forever. But in the Ramirez household, even my greatest achievement had to be hidden. I'd learned my lesson about sharing good news. When I'd made valedictorian junior year, Zoe had her worst meltdown yet, claiming my success was proof that Mom and Dad loved me more and that the stress was literally killing her brain cells. So this time, I kept the Columbia letter secret. I became a master of deception. The letter lived in my pillowcase for 3 days, then behind my bedroom mirror for a week. When Mom did laundry, I moved it inside an old tampon box, the one place I knew no one would look. Sometimes I take it out just to touch the Columbia seal to remind myself that somewhere beyond the walls of our house, I had value. But Zoe had been watching me. She had a sixth sense for happiness, like a vampire detecting blood. Over breakfast one Friday morning, she cornered me while I was eating my usual silent meal of scrambled eggs. "You're hiding something," she said, her eyes narrowing. "I can tell by that disgusting, happy expression, you keep trying to hide." My fork froze halfway to my mouth. "I don't know what you're talking about, liar." Her voice was sing-song, playful, which somehow made it more terrifying. "You've been different lately, lighter. Like you have some big secret that makes you better than the rest of us." "Zoe, I'm just eating breakfast." She studied my face like a detective examining evidence. "No, there's something big, and I'm going to find out what it is." Before I could stop her, she bolted from the kitchen and thundered up the stairs toward my room. I chased after her, my heart hammering against my ribs, but she was faster. By the time I reached my doorway, she'd already locked herself inside. "Zoe, get out of my room." I pounded on the door, hearing her ransacking my belongings. "You have no right." "Oh, I have every right," she called back. "This family has no secrets from me. I'm the sick one, remember? I deserve to know everything that might affect my mental health." For 20 minutes, she systematically destroyed my space. I could hear dresser drawers slamming, papers rustling, my jewelry box crashing to the floor. Mom and Dad were at work, and I was helpless to stop her rampage. When she finally emerged, triumphant, she was holding my Columbia letter. Well, she said, waving it like a trophy. "Columbia University. How interesting. My blood turned to ice. "Give that back." "Oh, Maya," she said, her voice dripping with fake sympathy. "You really thought you could keep this from me? From your own sister? How incredibly selfish." That's when I realized this wasn't just about the letter. This was about something much worse than I could have imagined. Zoe didn't just get upset about the Columbia letter. She turned it into the performance of her lifetime. First, she locked herself back in my room and started filming. Through the door, I could hear her sobbing, but not the messy, genuine tears of real grief. These were calculated theatrical sobs punctuated by perfectly timed sniffles. "This is what happens in our house," she wailed at her phone camera. "My sister gets everything and I get nothing. She hides her achievements because she knows it will hurt me. But that makes it even worse. The secret keeping the lies. It's like psychological torture." Then came the sound of glass shattering. She'd thrown something at my bedroom mirror. "Zoe!" I screamed, pounding on the door. "Stop destroying my room." But she wasn't done. I heard my desk chair rolling, more crashing, and then an ominous thud that sounded like she'd thrown herself against the wall. When she finally opened the door, her forehead was red and beginning to bruise. Her arms were scratched, and her hair looked like she'd been electrocuted. "Look what you made me do," she whispered, holding up her phone. "Look what your selfishness caused." The video was already uploading to Instagram, TikTok, and Twitter. She tagged Columbia University in every post along with a caption that made my stomach turn: "When your sister hides her college acceptance because she knows you're too mentally ill to handle it. This is what sibling abuse looks like. #mental health matters, #family trauma, #Columbia." But the worst moment came when she looked at me through those fake tears, her eyes glittering with something that definitely wasn't sadness. "I called the admissions office while I was in there," she said quietly, so only I could hear. "I told them my sister has been physically abusing me for years and that I was afraid to report it earlier because she threatened me. Mom already confirmed it when they called to verify." The world tilted beneath my feet. "What?" "I told them you've been hitting me during my ADHD episodes, taking advantage of when I can't think clearly to hurt me. I even sent them the video of my injuries." She gestured to her self-inflicted scratches and bruises. "They said they need to re-evaluate their decision given this new information about my character." My hands were shaking so hard I could barely speak. "Mom confirmed what?" Oh, she didn't know she was confirming anything. When Columbia called, they said they were following up on concerns about Maya's behavior toward her special needs sister. Mom just talked about how hard it's been managing my ADHD, how much stress it puts on the family, how sometimes I have episodes where I hurt myself. She was trying to be supportive, but Zoe shrugged. Context is everything. The call from Columbia came that afternoon. My acceptance had been rescinded pending a full investigation into the abuse allegations. They were committed to maintaining a safe environment for all students and couldn't risk admitting someone with a documented history of targeting vulnerable individuals. 4 years of perfect grades, thousands of hours studying. A personal essay about overcoming family challenges that had made my English teacher cry. Gone. As I sat on my bedroom floor, surrounded by the wreckage of my destroyed room, something inside me finally snapped. But instead of breaking down, I felt something else entirely: clarity. If Zoe wanted to play games, I was about to give her the biggest performance of her life. But I wasn't going to yell or fight or stoop to her level of destruction. No, I was going to give Zoe exactly what she'd always wanted: the biggest, most public meltdown of her entire life. And she was going to orchestrate it herself. The opportunity came 2 weeks later when I overheard her on the phone with her best friend Natasha talking about the Curtis Institute Summer Intensive Program. "It's basically a guaranteed pathway to their undergraduate program," Zoe gushed. "But there's a final evaluation next month. The director, Ms. Catherine Wells, is coming to Westbrook High to assess the last batch of candidates. If I nail this audition, I'm basically set for life." I did my research that night. Ms. Catherine Wells, acclaimed choreographer and Curtis faculty member. But more importantly, according to a performing arts blog interview from last year, her own daughter had been diagnosed with severe ADHD and had struggled throughout middle school before finding the right medication and therapy combination. Perfect. For the next 3 weeks, I became the sister from hell, but strategically. I started wearing that vanilla body spray from Bath & Body Works that Zoe claimed gave her sensory overload headaches. I tapped my pen during her practice sessions in the living room. I left my chemistry textbook open on the kitchen counter, knowing the sight of my academic success would trigger her anxiety. Every day, I pushed just a little bit more, watching her reactions, learning the exact formula that would send her over the edge. She'd whine to Mom about my inconsiderate behavior, but I always had plausible deniability. I'm just wearing perfume, Mom. I was just doing homework. I didn't realize tapping my pen was bothering anyone. The beautiful thing was that Zoe couldn't complain too much without looking petty. After all, she'd spent months training our parents to see me as the problem. Now she had to live with the consequences of making them believe I was naturally inconsiderate. On the morning of her evaluation, I positioned myself perfectly. The audition was scheduled for 10 a.m. in the school's black box theater, but Zoe would have to pass through the main lobby to get there. I arrived at school early and spread my AP calculus notes across a table right by the theater entrance, armed with my brightest yellow and pink highlighters, the color she claimed hurt her brain. I knew Zoe couldn't resist such a perfect setup. She'd see me sitting there, see the opportunity for a grand finale performance in front of the one person who could change her life, and she wouldn't be able to help herself. At 9:45 a.m., I heard her footsteps echoing down the hallway. Game time! Zoe appeared at the lobby entrance and stopped dead in her tracks. Her audition was in 15 minutes. She looked at me, then at the theater door where Ms. Wells was waiting, then back at me. I could practically see the gears turning in her head. If she had a meltdown now, this important director would witness it. Someone who understood ADHD. Someone who might give her special consideration. Someone who would see her as a victim rather than a manipulator. She'd played this scene 100 times before, but this time she was walking straight into my trap. Zoe took a deep breath and launched into her performance. Maya! She screamed at the top of her lungs loud enough for everyone in the building to hear. You knew I was auditioning today. You're sabotaging me on purpose. She threw herself into a nearby chair, sobbing with theatrical precision. You know, vanilla perfume triggers my ADHD episodes. You know, bright colors overwhelm my sensory processing, but you're sitting here anyway because you want me to fail. Right on cue, Ms. Wells emerged from the theater, her silver hair pulled back in an elegant bun, her expression professionally concerned. She looked like someone who dealt with her share of teenage drama, but her daughter's ADHD had probably taught her to take these situations seriously. What's happening out here? Ms. Wells asked, pulling out a small notebook. Zoe wailed louder, really committing to the performance. My sister knows I have ADHD, but she's trying to ruin my Curtis dreams. She positioned herself right here with all my triggers because she's jealous that I'm talented. I sat quietly, letting Zoe dig her own grave. This was her show after all. Ms. Wells kept writing, but her expression remained oddly neutral. What accommodations do you typically need for your ADHD? Make her leave, Zoe demanded through her tears. I need a safe space. I can't perform when I'm having an episode like this. I see. Ms. Wells's pen kept moving across her notepad. Your application mentioned that you're on medication for your ADHD. Did you take it today? For the first time, Zoe's performance faltered just slightly. A tiny hitch in her sobbing. My mom handles all of that stuff. Ms. Wells nodded thoughtfully. The Curtis Summer Intensive requires strict medication compliance for students with documented conditions. You did submit the proper medical documentation with your application. Correct. Zoe's tears were slowing down. She was trying to restart them, but something in Ms. Wells's tone seemed to be making her nervous. Yes, but I mean I don't actually take the medication because why? Because I sell. Zoe caught herself, her eyes widening in horror at what she'd almost admitted. Ms. Wells waited patiently, pen poised over her notepad. Zoe tried desperately to restart her meltdown, forcing out a few more sobs. She's making me confused. I can't think straight when she's triggering me like this. The medication, Ms. Wells pressed gently. Why don't you take it? I don't even need medication because the diagnosis is. Zoe's face went completely white as she realized what she was about to say. Because the diagnosis is what? Ms. Wells asked, her voice perfectly calm. Zoe looked trapped, her gaze darting between me, Ms. Wells, and the theater door like a cornered animal. Her fake tears had completely dried up, and her whole body was trembling, not from a meltdown, but from pure panic. Fake, she whispered, barely audible. My mom's friend is a nurse practitioner, and she wrote the diagnosis so I could get accommodations and extra time on tests. But this is Maya's fault. She made me say it. She confused me. Ms. Wells was already reaching for her phone. I hadn't said a single word during the entire encounter, and I didn't need to. Zoe had just destroyed herself. The aftermath unfolded like dominoes falling in perfect sequence. Ms. Wells called the school administration first, then the local authorities. Within an hour, Mom and Dad were sitting in Principal Morales' office while a very serious-looking police officer asked Zoe questions about prescription fraud and academic dishonesty. It turned out that selling ADHD medication was a federal crime and forging medical diagnosis constituted fraud in multiple jurisdictions. The nurse practitioner who'd written the fake diagnosis, Mom's college roommate Laura, was facing the loss of her license and potential criminal charges. But the most beautiful part was watching Mom and Dad's faces as the truth came out. "You mean the ADHD was fake?" Dad asked, his voice hollow with disbelief. "All of it." Zoe tried one last desperate performance, throwing herself on the floor of the principal's office and wailing about how the stress was making her suicidal. But without an audience who believed in her condition, the tantrum just looked like what it had always been, a spoiled teenager having a fit. The medication she claimed to be prescribed, the officer explained, she was actually selling to other students for $20 a pill. "We've identified at least 12 buyers over the past 2 years. Mom's face crumpled, but the therapist, Dr. Rios, he confirmed the diagnosis. According to our investigation, your daughter never actually saw Dr. Rios. She scheduled the initial appointment, but then cancelled and rescheduled it over and over again for 6 months. She was using the appointment confirmations to prove to you that she was receiving treatment. The house was eerily quiet that night. Zoe was staying at the County Juvenile Detention Center while they processed the charges, and Mom and Dad sat at our kitchen table trying to piece together 4 years of lies. All those times we made you cancel plans, Mom said, tears streaming down her face. All those times we told you to be quiet, to be smaller, to accommodate her. The birthday party, Dad added, his voice breaking, your acceptance to Columbia. God, Maya, what have we done? I should have felt vindicated. I should have been celebrating. But mostly, I just felt empty. Columbia was a lost cause. Too much damage had been done to that relationship. And frankly, I wasn't sure I wanted to go somewhere that had been so quick to believe the worst about me. But Northwestern had been my second choice anyway, and they were surprisingly understanding when I explained the situation. 6 months later, Zoe was doing community service for prescription fraud and living at home under strict supervision. She'd been expelled from Westbrook High and had to finish her senior year at a continuation school. No college would touch her application. She still told anyone who'd listen that I'd set her up, that I'd manipulated her into confessing. In her mind, she was still the victim of our family's story. But for the first time in 4 years, no one was listening. I started at Northwestern that fall with a full scholarship and a future that was entirely my own. Mom and Dad drove me to Illinois, crying and apologizing the entire way, promising to do better, to trust me, to never let anyone make me invisible again. Sometimes the best revenge isn't getting even. Sometimes it's simply letting someone show the world exactly who they really are. And sometimes that's enough.